Namaste, hello, and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav, and in this video, we'll be discussing selected topics from the Hindu and Indian Express for the date 14th September. Now, in this video, we'll be discussing the following topics. In LAC talks from peace to conflict prevention. Now, this article is by Lieutenant General D.S. Huda. So in this article, first from my side, I will tell you what is LAC. I will give you a brief about LAC. Then we'll see what the article has to say. Now in the article, General Huda briefly tells us about different agreements and confidence building measures that have taken place between India and China. And then he goes on to tell us why those confidence building measures have failed in his opinion. Good article, especially given the fact that General Huda was also posted in that sector for quite some time. Now the next, exploiting the Chinese exit, is a very good article, especially for young entrepreneurs who are looking to build next big IT companies in India. So this article tells us about how the Chinese tech giants actually grew, and that was because of the censorship of China, which he calls the Great Chinese Internet Wall. He tells us how, beginning with 2010, big companies like Google, Facebook started exiting China because they could not comply with their laws and censorship requests. So that vacuum was created in China, and that was filled by different IT companies which grew up to be tech giants like Alibaba, Tencent, etc. Now he also tells us how they began by imitating the American apps, but slowly they evolved into their own space. And he also tells us that after the banning of 118 Chinese apps by the Indian government, similar opportunity is there in the Indian market for the tech entrepreneurs to cash onto. He also tells us what can be done to cash on this opportunity. Then reducing India's cancer burden. It basically discusses the National Cancer Registry Program report of August 2020. It also tells us about the state of cancer in India, the leading causes for cancer among men and women, the impact of cancer, and why is it difficult to predict cancer. And in the end, it also tells us what all efforts India is taking to combat this menace of cancer. Then Turkey pulls back vessel from Mediterranean Sea. So after a brief drama between Turkey and Greece in the Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey has called back its vessels. So we'll see why and what happened and what are the parties involved. And finally, Chinese spying and hybrid warfare, very important, and Indian Express exclusive. It tells us how China is using sophisticated technology and using a company called Shenzhen Zhenhua Data Information Technology Corporation Limited, and through that company, China is spying on everyone, starting from the President of India to big media moguls to important government functionaries. So this is the article 1 in their series. Let's see what all they reveal. And we'll also see what is hybrid warfare. So let's get started. In LAC talks from peace to conflict prevention. Now before we begin, let me give you a brief about the LAC. Now LAC stands for Line of Actual Control. Now the problem is that the border between India and China was not ever clearly demarcated. And the LAC that we talk about is the LAC that India only agreed to in 1993 when our then Prime Minister Mr. P.V. Narasimha Rao visited Beijing. Now India sees LAC only as a working border till a final solution is reached. Now what is the problem? The problem is problem of perception, that India deems some part to be its territory and China deems some part to be its territory. Now there's a difference of perception of about 1500 kilometers between India and China. Now let's just go over the LAC. Now the LAC is divided into 3 sectors: Western sector, then the Middle sector and the Eastern sector. Now India shares a boundary of about 4050 kilometers with China, and the disputed borders add up to 3290 kilometers. Now the western side consists of the UT of Ladakh, comprising of Ladakh range, the UT of Jammu and Kashmir, that is the border of about 2150 kilometers that separates J&K from Xinjiang province. Now in this western sector, especially important is the Aksai Chin region. Now this Aksai Chin region is the region from where a strategic road of China runs through, which connects the Tibet region with the Xinjiang region. So this region is very, very important for China, and this region is very, very important for us as well. China fears that if India controls this region, then China would lose control over both Xinjiang and Tibet. And in both the regions, China is facing problem because Tibetan people, they want their rightly earned freedom and they truly deserve it. And in Xinjiang, they are oppressing the Uyghurs, and also Xinjiang connects China to Central Asia. So if China were to lose control over both of these, then there could be substantial loss of territory and loss of face for China. Now the second part is the middle part, which is the least controversial. This is about 625 kilometer boundary along Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand. But in this sector also we are starting to see problems, if not by China, then by its proxy Nepal. China has been provoking its proxy Nepal to pick up fights with India in this sector, especially in the Uttarakhand region. And the next is the eastern side, which is around 1440 kilometer of disputed boundary along Arunachal Pradesh and this Sikkim region. Now Arunachal Pradesh, China claims the entire Arunachal Pradesh, including the Tawang Valley, which is strategically very important, and China calls Arunachal Pradesh South Tibet. And in the Sikkim sector lies the Doklam, where there was a standoff in 2017, and the current standoff is happening in this western side. Now why do the standoffs occur? Because of the upgradation of infrastructure by India. Now India is also building its infrastructure along the LAC, and that is really rattling the Chinese because they are losing their advantage. Now let's get into the article and let's see what General Huda has to say. Now he first gives a brief history of the LAC agreements from 1962. After the 1962 war, India and China border was loosely controlled by both sides with a fairly sparse deployment of troops. Then in 1967, there was a bloody clash at Nathula, which was provoked by the Chinese. Then in 1976, the China Study Group was established. Now this gave clarity to India's claims by laying down patrolling points, which are known as PP, and guiding the scope of military activity along the LAC. So it did two important things. Number one, laying down the patrolling points where Indian troops and the Chinese troops would be patrolling, and also the scope of military activity along the LAC. In 1986, a significant change in border management occurred after the Chinese occupation of a post in the Sumdorong-Chu Valley. So see, China is always provoking India one way or the other. The massive response by Indian Army sparked realization on both sides that pending a settlement, some mechanism must be evolved to keep peace along the LAC. And that really paved the way for signing of the 1993 agreement when Mr. P.V. Narasimha Rao visited Beijing. The 1993 agreement on maintenance of peace and tranquility along the LAC. So this formalized the concept of LAC, and it also created a group of diplomatic and military experts for resolution of differences between the two sides on the alignment of LAC. But who knows, in future China might say that entire India belongs to China based on historical maps. Now reduction in military force along the LAC in conformity with requirements of principle of mutual and equal security to ceilings to be mutually agreed. So both sides would be mutually agreeing how many troops can be deployed, and they should also follow the principle of mutual and equal security. That means both sides have the right to maintain troops and they should be able to defend themselves. Then in 1996, confidence building measures along the LAC. This advocated reducing or limiting military forces to minimum levels and limiting the deployment of major armaments such as tanks, artillery guns, missiles to mutually agreed level. Then again, China is breaking all these promises because China is heavily deploying both its troops and machinery at the LAC on the northern banks of the Pangong Tso, where the current standoff is intensifying. Then 2005 Protocol of Confidence Building Measures along the LAC. It added more confidence building measures outlining the procedures to be adopted when soldiers of the two sides came to a face-to-face situation while patrolling areas when there was a differing perception of the LAC. So it said that there cannot be any use of weapons or violence. That is why till now we did not see the soldiers using weapons, but unfortunately China is hell-bent on picking up a fight to expand the mechanism of border meeting points and exchange between the two militaries. Then in 2013, Border Defense Cooperation Agreement, the two sides decided that neither side will use military capability to attack the other side nor tail patrols along the border. But China does not respect any of these. Now, General Huda tells us why there has been an erosion in confidence building measures. He says two unimplemented aspects of agreements combined with a shift in military posture by both sides has led to an erosion of confidence building measures between two armies in the past few years. First, differences in alignment of LAC could not be resolved, and they will not be resolved because China is not ready for a final agreement, and neither are we backing down from our own legitimate claims. Attempts were made and maps were exchanged of the central sector, which is the least controversial as I told you, but now China is using its proxies like Nepal to pick up fights with India. But there were apparent differences over the western sector and process stalled in 2002. Second, the agreement of reducing military forces along the LAC to minimum was neither seriously discussed nor implemented. In 2006, a decision was taken to build 73 strategic roads along the LAC. And it is these roads, especially the DSDBO road that India has built, that has really rattled the Chinese because it connects India's farthest airstrip, which is Daulat Beg Oldi. This happens to be the highest airstrip in the world, and India has proven its capability of landing the C-130 at this post. That really speaks about our capability of deploying our troops at the highest levels. So, and one must also keep in mind that Indian Army is the most experienced army in the world when it comes to high altitude warfare. So China may try to play all the mind games it wants to, but it really can't intimidate us. In 2013, two new dimensions were raised to strengthen deployment in Arunachal Pradesh, and additional formations were deployed in Ladakh. As infrastructure improved on the Indian side and larger forces were available for patrolling, the LAC face-offs with Chinese patrols increased. And I've created a very good video. I'm not saying good video because I have made it, but it can be very helpful. Please do watch that video. It tells us all about the LAC. In many cases, the Chinese soldiers complained that they were being prevented from going up to areas that they had traditionally patrolled, but India was defending its perception of the LAC more robustly. India's perception of the LAC is clearly marked on its military maps, and while the soldiers understand that there are areas of differing perception, there is no ambiguity about the line that they are tasked to defend. So our soldiers are pretty much clear in their mind that which area do they have to defend, and they will not leave that place. Talking about Chinese, they have a very bad record. Even recently, they were on a peacekeeping mission in Somalia and they were surrounded by the rebel forces. So they abandoned their post and they went into hiding, and it was the Indian army that came to their rescue. And I'm not talking conjecturally, it's all on record. As face-offs between the two armies became more frequent, protocols weakened. The first manifestation of this came in the Depsang intrusion in 2013, and the attempted intrusion at Chumar in 2014. Even after Chumar, all the protocols had weakened. They were still holding and held out until the Doklam incident of 2017. And this Doklam incident can really be said to be the turning point, because here India proved beyond doubt that it is ready to stand up to the bully called China. And from that moment, the Chinese strategic circle has really been disturbed at the guts shown by India to stand up to it. It was after Doklam that we saw greater aggression by both sides. Now, why the problem has still not been solved? As per General Huda, two fundamentals of the agreements, resolution of the differing perceptions of the LAC and reduction of the military forces, has not been taken care of or has been ignored over the years, and that is why the problem still persists. But like I always say, we cannot trust the Chinese, and until unless we humiliate them more on the border, they will keep pushing. So let's really pray for our army, and let's not be warmongers, because it's very easy for us to say that let's go to war, but many soldiers die and their families are left behind. Let us hope that this problem is solved through talks. Frontline workers will get vaccine first, Dr. Harsh Vardhan. Now, Dr. Harsh Vardhan recently made this statement, and he said that he would volunteer to take the vaccine to remove any fears among the minds of people about the safety and efficacy of a vaccine when a vaccine is available. So the frontline health workers, senior citizens, and those with comorbidities would be administered the COVID-19 vaccine first when it becomes available. Now, what are India's preparations? While no date has been fixed for the vaccine launch, it may be ready by the first quarter of 2021. So let's hope that really happens. Now, the National Expert Group on Vaccine Administration for COVID-19 is drawing up a detailed strategy on how to immunize the majority of the population. So when the vaccine actually becomes available, then there would be huge logistical challenges as to how to store the vaccine, how to transport the vaccine to different places, and then what sort of a planning should be there to immunize the population at large. So it's again going to be a Herculean task. And then issues like costs and whether it should be entirely private sector or public sector or a hybrid model, whatever has to be there, that all has to be planned in advance. Issues like vaccine security, cost, equity, cold chain requirements, production timelines, etc. are also being discussed intensely. So India is making its plans, even though vaccine is still some time away, but we are having a plan in place so that when a vaccine becomes available, we are ready to roll it out to mass population. India is also actively partnering with Coalition for Endemic Preparedness Innovations, CEPI. Trials at different phases are ongoing with respect to several vaccines in Indian laboratories, both private and public, and also in Indian hospitals. So I've told you earlier as well that India is a major player in this whole vaccine game. How? Number one, India's SII is the leading vaccine manufacturer of the world, and India is the vaccine house of the world, as if you may call it, because 70% of all the vaccines that are created or that are given to populations are manufactured in India. Number two, population. India has a huge population pool, so that population is a very good candidate for phase 3 trials. So then again, India is almost at the center of this COVID vaccine development, and India is also developing its own candidates. Let's hope that those candidates also prove effective. Reducing India's cancer burden. Now, this is a National Cancer Registry Program report of August 2020. So it was compiled by the ICMR, that is the Indian Council of Medical Research, along with National Center for Disease Informatics and Research. Now let us see what this report says, and let us also look at the state of cancer in India. Now, this report estimated that the number of cancer cases in India in 2020 is 13.9 lakh. India has seen a steady rise in cancer cases over many decades. In fact, between 1990 to 2016, in a decade, there has been an increase of 2.6 times of India's cancer burden as per a report of 2017. So this is not a good news. More and more people are getting cancer. Almost 2/3 of these cancer cases are at late stages. That means the diagnosis is quite late. If you catch cancer early, there are better chances of treatment. But if the diagnosis is late, then treatment becomes more complicated, and in many cases, it also becomes untreatable. So it also tells us about the common cancers among men and women. In men, the common cancers are lung, oral cavity, stomach, and esophagus. That is the food pipe. And in women, the common cancers are breast, cervix, ovary, and gallbladder. Now, the most common use was tobacco use in all forms. That is, whether you chew gutka or you smoke cigarettes, you are susceptible to cancer. So tobacco use is a major avoidable risk factor for the development of cancer in 27% of cancer cases. Other important risk factors include alcohol use, inappropriate diet, low physical activity, obesity, and pollution. So see, these are risk factors, and most of the people, they are susceptible to all of these in this day and age. So you please take care of your health. Now, impact of cancer. Now, cancer causes loss of lives, that we all know, but it also has a tremendous socio-economic impact because treatment is quite costly. You must have seen those trailers that are played before the beginning of a movie, and you must have seen that ad where he says, I had to sell 2 bangles to save her, and a son telling about how he had to sell bangles to save his mother. So these are all the real things because the treatment is very, very costly, and most of the people, especially those who consume tobacco products like gutka and all that, they are from a lower socio-economic background. So it becomes a double whammy for them. The burden is too high. And any form of disease is also a burden on the society at large. Reducing cancer is a prerequisite for addressing social and economic inequity, stimulating economic growth, and accelerating sustainable development. Now, it also tells us that cancer is difficult to predict. Cancer occurrence is a complex interplay of host and environmental determinants. That means host means the individual choices of the person, and environmental determinants like we saw in the case of pollution. Now, pollution can be air pollution, it can also be water pollution, which makes it difficult to predict it at an individual level. But it is estimated that nearly 50 to 60% of cancer cases can be avoided by tackling the known risk factors effectively. That means avoid pollution, lead a healthy lifestyle, have a healthy diet, avoid tobacco, avoid excessive use of alcohol, so you have a better probability of not getting cancer. Now, what have been India's efforts to tackle this menace? India is committed to achieving a 1/3 reduction in cancer-related deaths by 2030 under the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we have to reduce the cancer burden and the cancer-related death by 1/3 by 2030. And it has made considerable progress. India has improved in some areas such as personal hygiene thanks to Swachh Bharat Mission, which are distant drivers of cancers. Government programs such as Ayushman Bharat, Swasth Bharat, Swachh Bharat Mission, Poshan Abhiyan, Pradhan Mantri Bharatiya Jan Aushadhi Pariyojana, and initiatives such as FSSAI's new labeling and display regulation and drug price control can encourage intersectoral and multi-sectoral action. For example, labeling can tell us what kind of ingredients are there in food materials. FSSAI is basically a regulator for food. So if there are any carcinogens in your food, you can get to know that and you can make safe and informed choices. And drug price control is also important because, as I told you, the treatment is very, very costly. So if drugs are cheap and if we are able to detect cancer in early stages, then we can also fight it effectively. Other initiatives such as National Health Policy, National Tobacco Control Program, and National Program for Prevention and Control of Cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and stroke are also paving the way for progress. So, cancer is both genetic and lifestyle disease. Some people have more genetic predisposition for catching this disease, but as it turns out, cancer is increasingly becoming a lifestyle disease, especially to our exposure to different kinds of pollutants, different carcinogens in our food, cosmetic products, and other products that we use, and our exposure to radio waves and other electromagnetic waves like the telephone towers, which are making us more and more susceptible to cancer. So the solution is avoid tobacco, avoid alcohol, lead a healthy lifestyle, and make informed choices. Exploiting the Chinese exit. Like I told you in the introduction, this is a very, very good article. First, it will tell us how Chinese tech giants grew. The reason was the Great Chinese Internet War. Then it tells us that similar situation occurs in India today, especially after banning of 118 Chinese apps. Then it also tells us how Indian companies have been misguided, or they have not had their priorities set straight. While we have been exporting software outside, Indian market has been dominated by Chinese and American softwares. So Indian software developers need to focus on our own domestic market. And then it tells us what the steps should be taken to develop the next tech giant companies in India and what model should they follow. It also tells us how the Chinese apps started with blind aping of the American apps, but then they evolved themselves and now they are pioneers in AI technology. In fact, for an example, the AI of TikTok is very, very dangerous. It can keep you hooked for a very long time. It can make your entire profile on how you watch the videos, and it can connect you to similar videos. I mean, it's amazing, but at the same time, very dangerous, the kind of algorithm they have made. And it also tells us that though China makes so many apps, it still needs access to outside markets, especially India. Now, Indian internet market is very, very special. More and more people are having access to internet, especially after the Jio boom. And already the internet packages in India are the cheapest in the world. So this huge population is again very, very fertile market for Chinese apps. And also this population can be a good feeding pool for their AI technology, which can train their AI. But the banning of Chinese apps has now opened opportunities for Indian entrepreneurs. For example, after the ban of PUBG, the famous Bollywood actor came up with the idea of 4G. So similarly, many other apps can be developed in India. So let's see what this article says. So in the absence of Chinese tech, the primary Indian IT objective must be to shift to providing for Indians. Right now we have companies like Infosys, TCS, etc. who are basically catering to foreign clients, but nobody is paying attention to Indian market. Now this market has been very skewed, this internet market, that the app makers have been focusing, or the software providers have been focusing on the top 15% who can actually pay a lot. But there's a huge pool in the rest 85% which is there to be exploited. Now, how the Chinese tech giants emerged. In January 2010, Google announced that in response to a hacking attack from within China, on it and dozens of other US companies, they were no longer willing to operate in China. So basically they exited China because of hacking and the censorship requests that the Chinese government were placing on them. Meanwhile, in the intervening years, since Google and others were forced out, the Chinese internet market exploded. So China also has a huge population pool and they also have access to internet. So there was need, but there was a vacuum. So big companies emerged. For example, in place of Twitter, they have Weibo. They also have an alternative to YouTube. They also have an alternative to Instagram. In fact, on their alternative, you can also shop directly for the products that you like. And Instagram, as a matter of fact, is trying to bring that feature on their own app. So the Chinese market has now grown to over 900 million users, most of them on mobile and paradoxically the Google's Android, which was forced out of that country, from just over 300 million in early 2010. The Great Internet Wall of China, which is the censorship which did not let the other companies operate in China, did not filter and screen Western content so much as it insulated Chinese entrepreneurs from big tech in Silicon Valley. So, because there was no competition, so they were insulated from this big money. So, that was a space where they could grow. The Chinese web market was left with substantial appetites for internet-based social, commerce, and lifestyle services, which big tech could not fulfill because they were not there. Homegrown firms such as WeChat and Alibaba had a field day building apps that were at first faithful reproductions of Silicon Valley. In fact, if you see both in software and in hardware, China has a model of imitating the West. They copy the Western products or the products from other countries, and then they make their own cheaper versions. For example, famous OnePlus company, it came up while copying Apple. In fact, in China, you'll find actual Apple copy stores. And also, you'll find them copying the robots and other things that other countries are making. In fact, their so-called fifth generation fighter plane is also a copy of American fighter plane, but soon morphed into distinctly Chinese applications tailored solely to the home market. Baidu has replaced Google in China. Youku Todo, see, looks similar to YouTube, is YouTube of China. And Xiaohongshu is a version of Instagram from which users can shop for goods directly. WeChat began as a simple messaging app but is now many things for the Chinese: social media, news, messaging, payment, and digital commerce. Something like what is WhatsApp to India. According to 2016 White House report, the Chinese have leapfrogged even the US in artificial intelligence research, especially in components of neural networks and deep learning. So what is artificial intelligence, what are neural networks, and what is deep learning? We'll be covering that in full detail in some future video. This is a very interesting topic and this has implication on our future. In this case, the intellectual property being produced actually belongs to China and is not a faithful duplicate of someone else's product or technology. And China was looking to dominate this space of artificial intelligence and also the 5G. But China's actions are detrimental to its own companies. Now, major economies in the world have started banning Huawei from the 5G trials. For example, US, UK and other countries are also likely to follow. India has not clarified its stand, but for all practical purposes, Huawei would not be conducting 5G trials in India as well. And already the Ministry of Home Affairs has raised red flags against using Chinese equipment in our 4G, 3G, 2G and also probably for the 5G networks, because those are being used for spying purposes. In fact, later in this video, we'll be discussing the sophisticated Chinese program of spying on other countries, including India. So this has far-reaching implications. In its attempt to dominate the rest of the world, Chinese internet industry desperately needs India's freshly minted 500 million netizens. So that is why, see, after PUBG ban, this company is divesting its ownership from the Chinese parent company so that it can get the license to operate in India again. Similarly, in US, they are threatening ban of TikTok unless until TikTok does not sell its American arm to some local company, and companies like Microsoft and even Walmart are in talks to buy the TikTok American arm. So China needs India's market. 500 million netizens to contribute to act as a training ground for the AI algorithms they put together. So they'll get both the revenue and also a training pool for their AI. China's internet ecosystem is entirely self-created, self-run and self-serviced. Yet it exports the newly banned apps such as TikTok, PUBG worldwide, adding to the user base of 900 plus million Chinese netizens whose data they already have exclusive access to. And a very worrying fact is that a 2017 Chinese law says that any Chinese company, no matter where they are operating, they are legally bound to share their data with China or the government of China when asked to do so in the name of national security. So whatever data you and I or anyone would have on a Chinese platform is for all practical purposes open to Chinese. And that is also one of the reasons why these apps are being banned. India has been the pioneer in banning these apps, and soon other countries like United States would also be banning these apps. Internet market in India. The rise of Jio will provide hundreds of millions of non-urban Indians with fluid access to the internet. So more and more people would be getting access to the internet. The market would be expanding. India now has the lowest internet data costs in the world. The decision to ban such apps in India is not only a geopolitical move, but also a strategic trade maneuver that can have significant economic impact. Banning the Chinese websites and applications to the Indian public effectively allows our homegrown IT talent to focus on newly arrived internet user. So there is the opportunity for our tech entrepreneurs. Now it also tells us about the misplaced focus of our IT giants. India's focus remains on exporting IT services while paying little attention to servicing our own nation's tech market. We have spent the last 2 decades exporting the bulk of our technology services to developed countries in the West. The vacuum created as the Indian internet grew has been filled by American big tech and by the Chinese. So here again, India is lagging. New opportunities and how to capitalize on them. So the banning of the 118 Chinese apps has opened up new opportunities, and then the author also gives us some advice how to capitalize on these opportunities. So after the removal of more than 118 Chinese apps, Indian techies have started trying to fill the holes with copycat replacement websites and applications. For example, there were announcement of some app which would be a copy of TikTok, then copies of PUBG, etc., etc. But faithful copies are not enough for us to make full use of China's exit. So we should also learn from the Chinese experience that first they made faithful copies, but then they evolved products that were uniquely suited to their own market. The primary Indian IT objective must shift from servicing others to providing for ourselves. So again, there can be Atmanirbhar Bharat in this field as well, and also Make in India. We make for ourselves and then we can also export it to other countries, especially Africa and Latin America. For example, we have been exporting our expertise in railways and sectors like electricity to these regions. So if we develop good apps, we can also export these apps to these regions. In the absence of Chinese tech, Indian entrepreneurs should not simply look to replace what the existing firms have so far been providing. They should focus instead on providing services and products of high quality that will be used by everyday Indians across the country. So that means those apps should be also in multiple language formats, not just English. They should be in as many languages as possible, and there should also be high portability on those apps. The aim of providing netizens with the same services across diverse markets is overarching. Regional barriers created by language exist within our own nation. These provide a creation of excellent smaller markets with opportunities for specialized internet services created for a local community by the community itself. So there can be little apps for local communities. If we create hyper-local and hyper-regional services of high quality and great accessibility that are also portable across our linguistic diversity, then we can make big success. We are far more likely to succeed in creating one of the strongest internet markets in the world rather than creating copycat apps or apps that only cater to English speakers. We can export our Indian stack to other countries in the south, such as those in Africa and Latin America. So, a very, very good article, good advice, good detailed analysis. Turkey pulls back vessel from Mediterranean Sea. So, basically, what is happening that this area in the Mediterranean Sea, the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, is a new ground for conflict between Greece and Turkey. Now, Turkey under Mr. Erdogan has been asserting itself. Mr. Erdogan wants to probably build his image as a strong man, and he's also very ambitious and he's looking to be the next leader of the Islamic world. In fact, he has sort of proclaimed himself to be the caliph of the Islamic world, and with the signing of the Abrahamic Accords and probably the normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi, when that happens in future, would open a new opportunity for Turkey to assert itself. Now, Turkey has been converting churches into mosques. For example, the Hagia Sophia, and the Hagia Sophia was particularly important to the Orthodox Greeks who follow Christianity, Orthodox Greek Church. So that was a trigger point. Now this Eastern Mediterranean Sea, these are all Greek islands. So it is dotted with Greek islands. So Greece claims that these waters are Greek waters, and there's a concept of exclusive economic zone which is defined under the United Nations Convention on Law of Sea. Again, I have made a video on South China Sea. There I have explained what UNCLOS is. So basically what exclusive economic zone means is that this is a zone in which a country has exclusive rights for commercial exploitation. For example, if this is the exclusive economic zone of Turkey, then all the resources like natural gas, fishes, etc., whatever is found there, only Turkey has a right to commercially exploit them. And other countries like Turkey, Libya, or any other country would have a right of passage through this exclusive economic zone. Now the problem is that in Eastern Mediterranean, oil and gas has been found. Now Turkey says that this region belongs to Turkey because Turkey says that it is our extended exclusive economic zone. Greece says no, it is our zone, and they have been fighting. Another party involved is Cyprus. See, this is Cyprus. The northern part is controlled by Turkey and the southern part is Free Cyprus, as they say, but Turkey does not recognize it. So this is also bone of contention. Now Greece and Turkey are both NATO allies. So they should have solved this problem within the NATO framework, but Turkey over the years has been acting in a manner which is not in line with the NATO policy. For example, Turkey has built close relations with Russia over the years. Now, this problem involves Turkey, Greece, then Cyprus, and to some extent Egypt, because then there was side taking. Egypt said that we'll come to aid of Turkey, and then France and NATO said that we'll back Greece, and they also threatened some sanctions on Turkey. This all started when Turkey sent its exploration vessel Okus Reis in those Greek waters, and that vessel was accompanied by Turkish warships. So Greece also sent its warships, and then there were military exercises, then there were statements from both sides. Now Turkey has called back its ship. So let's see what happens in future. Now let us see what this article says. Turkey's seismic research vessel Okus Reis returned to waters near the southern province of Antalya. Greece said that this was a positive first step in easing tensions over offshore natural resources. Now Turkey and Greece, both NATO members, have overlapping claims to continental shelves and rights to potential energy resources in the Eastern Mediterranean. Tensions flared up last month after Ankara sent Okus Reis to map out possible oil and gas drilling prospects in waters claimed by Greece, Cyprus, and Turkey. So, like I said, three main parties and disputing claims. Now, a very eye-opening article. It's first in a series by Indian Express. Now, the Chinese have really lost it. China under Mr. Xi Jinping is actually like some super villain organization, and Mr. Xi is acting like some super villain from some Bond movie. And it's really surprising what things they are doing. Anyways, it's also anyways, it is also a very real eye opener for all of us as to what sort of things we share online and what is the depth till which these online platforms and companies can know about them. China watching President, PM, key opposition leaders, cabinet, CMs, Chief Justice of India, the list goes on. See, all these people are under the Chinese radar. Union ministers, chief ministers, ex-chief ministers, important government functionaries, important military leaders, all are under Chinese radar. On list, chief of defense staff, military, science, top brass, they don't leave anybody. So important part here is to understand what is hybrid warfare. First of all, the company that is doing this is Zenhua Data Information Technology Corporation Limited. Now, when Indian Express posted its question, the company's website has been pulled down after that. Of course, we'll not get any response from the Chinese, and they'll cook up any story. And unfortunately, there will be many people in India who will be defending the Chinese, unfortunately. Now, what does Zenhua Data do? Let us get into the hybrid warfare and how the Zenhua Data company has been acting on the behalf of the communist government in China. So what does Zenhua Data do? It targets individuals and institutions in politics, government, business, technology, media, and civil society. They don't seem to leave anyone. Claiming to work with Chinese intelligence, military, and security agencies, Zenhua monitors the subject's digital footprint across social media platforms, maintains an information library which includes content not just from news sources, forums, but also from papers, patents, bidding documents, even positions of recruitment. So see, such a sophisticated and dangerous program they are running. Significantly, it builds a relational database which records and describes association between individuals, institutions, and information. Just in the previous article, we were talking about the sophisticated AI. So see what all things the Chinese are capable of doing. So please be very, very careful about the kind of data that you share, and you should also take precautions while browsing the net. Use the incognito mode as much as you can. Do not just give your data to any website or any other app just for some free credits. Be very cautious when you share data, including personal data, pictures, anything on the internet. Please be very, very cautious. Collecting such massive data and weaving in public or sentiment analysis around these targets. Zenhua offers threat intelligence services. So see, such a sophisticated program, really shocking. Isn't much of this publicly available data, so what's the worry? So a valid question, because most of this data is available publicly. It is not the data per se, but the range and the use to which it may be put that arises red flags. So Zenhua's 24/7 watch collects personal information on the target from all social media accounts, keeps track of the target's friends and relationships, analyzes posts, likes and comments by friends and followers, collects even private information about movements such as geographic location through artificial intelligence tools. So just now I was telling you about their artificial intelligence. So see, such a sophisticated program they are running. They're basically snooping on you 24/7. Domestic security agencies use such data for law and order applications such as tracking protests. But in the hands of foreign agencies with no supervision or oversight, such data can serve a range of purposes. Seemingly innocuous, granular information may be put together in a broader framework for deliberate tactical maneuvering. That's at the heart of what Zenhua itself flaunts as its role in hybrid warfare. Very, very dangerous. So what's hybrid warfare? As early as 1999, Unrestricted Warfare, a publication by China's People's Liberation Army, mapped the contours of hybrid warfare, a shift in the arena of violence from military to political, economic, and technological. The new weapons of this war, wrote authors Colonel Kuai Liang and Colonel Wang Jiangxi, were those closely linked to the lives of the common people. And one morning, people will awake to discover with surprise that quite a few gentle and kind things have begun to have offensive and lethal characteristics. So dangerous. It's just like watching some sci fi movie. But as they say, truth is stranger than fiction. Through targeted cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and espionage, hybrid warfare seeks to incite social discord, disrupt economic activities, undermine institutions, and discredit political leadership and the intelligentsia. So that is what they have been doing. In India, they are spreading fake news about political leaders from across the political spectrum. They're also spreading fake narratives. And just in yesterday's video, I also told you about their interference into the US presidential polls. Indeed, within countries too, political parties target the opposition via these same tools. Every second country is giving hybrid warfare a shot since the Russian breakthrough in 2014-15, annexation of Crimea, and undeclared conflict in eastern Ukraine. But few match China's capability, as we have seen during the Hong Kong protests last year, said a top security expert. So, China used technology to the full to break the protests, and they basically ran a very sophisticated surveillance system tracking the apps and everything to basically know when the protests were happening, where they were happening, and then they responded accordingly. Does this monitoring flout any laws in India? Of course they do. Under the Information Technology Rules 2011, under IT Act 2000, personal data is any information regarding natural person which either directly or indirectly, in combination with other information available or likely to be available, is capable of identifying such a person. So it defines the personal data. This, however, does not include information freely or accessible in the public domain. So the information in public domain does not come under the definition of personal data. These rules also do not impose any conditions on the use of personal data for direct marketing, etc. Many commercial entities access and aggregate such information for targeted advertisement. When it comes to third-party collection of data, like what Zenua does, it is slightly complicated. The company is undertaking this without consent. A third party scrapping your geolocation from social media sites and sharing it with rival countries' intelligence will be seen as illegal, at least in some advanced jurisdictions. So for example, you use a particular app and you enable location access. Now Zenua would be collecting your location data from that site. So you have given your consent to that particular app, not to Zenua, but Zenua is illegally using your personal data. But privacy laws are almost impossible to enforce in foreign jurisdictions because they differ from country to country. This is unlikely to change anytime soon. That is also true. And I already told you that a 2017 legislation mandates any Chinese company to share every kind of data with the communist regime in China in the name of national security. So whatever data you create on Chinese platforms such as PUBG, TikTok, or any other app that you might be using, just be sure that that data is with the Chinese government. And in this 21st century, data is the new oil. So whoever has the data, they are going to call the shots. And that is why China is invested heavily in AI development. What's the concern over Zenua's monitoring? As flare-ups intensified along the line of actual control, India blocked incrementally since June over 100 Chinese apps for engaging in activities prejudicial to sovereignty and integrity of India, defense of India, security of state, and public order. But such moves are unlikely to impact an operation like Zenua's. There have been a string of recent reports on China's attempts to cultivate potential assets for sensitive military, intelligence, or economic information in the US and Europe through social media. For example, they are targeting the presidential campaigns in US and also political parties in Europe. Why does this company Zenua need processing centers in so many countries? If you don't want attention from the platforms you are mass scrapping, you simply use proxies. So they are basically making proxies in these countries. The only plausible purpose is to build capacity for following up on actionable data. Zenua uses the open information environment liberal democracies take for granted to target the individuals and institutions. The threat of surveillance and monitoring of foreign individuals by authoritarian China is very real. So basically, they are using our personal data, which we have given assent to various apps to use, and they are basically scrapping that data from those apps and platforms, and they're making a very sophisticated portfolio. They're targeting everything and tracking everything from the comments that your friends and relatives make on your posts or your social media to what your friends and your relatives are doing, to your political inclinations, to your choices, to what you buy, to where you eat, where you go. Everything is being tracked and being added to your profile. Very, very dangerous. And what is hybrid warfare? It is a warfare which seeks to use technology to spread cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, espionage, and incite social discord, disrupt economic activities, everything you can imagine with the use of technology. So it's like weakening something from the inside without even shooting a single bullet. So let's see what else do we get to know, how much more we get to know from this series. Now something about this Shenzhen Zenua data information technology. This has been operating since April 2018. It has 50 employees in China, 20 overseas data processing centers from where they are scrapping data from other apps or platforms. It handles 150 million pieces of data daily, and it is tracking 3 million entities through 5 billion news and social media inputs. See, the figures are astounding. Then it tells about the owner and key partners. You can take a screenshot and read about this. So friends, this is all for this video. I hope this was helpful. If you found our video to be good enough, please subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and also press the bell icon so that you get notification whenever we post a new video. Also, please do connect with us on our Instagram profile, UPSC for Everyone. So see you next time. Till then, stay happy, stay safe, and have a nice day. Namaste and Jai Hind.